So my headline today comes from Marijuana Moment. Senate votes to allow VA doctors to recommend medical cannabis to veterans, similar to House passed version by Kyle Yeager. The Senate has approved a bill that prevents the VA from limiting or interfering with VA doctors who issue medical cannabis recommendations. This Senate bill sets the stage for a conference with the House, which has approved its own bill with similar language. Senators approved the Military Construction, Veterans Affairs, and Related Agencies measure, with Senator Jeff Merkley providing the cannabis amendment as part of a three-bill package on Wednesday in an 82-15 vote. The vote comes 3 months after the House passed its own version of the bill with a cannabis amendment by Representative Brian Mast and other members of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. The exact language of the proposals is slightly different, meaning that they will need to be reconciled in a bipartisan conference committee or negotiated by House and Senate leaders as part of a final bill to be sent to the president. The language in the Senate bill prohibits funds to be used to limit or interfere with the ability of healthcare providers to provide recommendations, fill out forms, or take steps to comply with a state medical cannabis program. The House bill prohibits funds to be used for Veterans Health Directive, which prevents VA doctors from completing forms or registering patients in state medical cannabis programs. So a similar situation played out in 2016, only to have the issue completely stripped out of the final bill. Veterans face too many roadblocks in getting the care they need and deserve. That's why I have consistently led an effort to ensure VA doctors are able to discuss the full range of legal treatment options with their patients, Merkley told Marijuana Moment. 3 months ago, bipartisan congressional lawmakers expressed deep concern over the current VA directive that continues to prohibit its doctors from making medical cannabis recommendations in states where cannabis is legal. Representative Earl Blumenauer, co chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, sent a letter to VA Secretary Dennis McDonough and Department of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, blasting them for their misguided opposition to medical cannabis as a treatment option for PTSD. Many veterans already use cannabis for medical purposes and as a substitute for prescription drugs and their side effects. A recent survey of veterans who use cannabis report improved quality of life and reduced opiate use. Federal laws are difficult to pass. The endless discussions, debates, and political posturing are far removed from the real world. As this story reports, many veterans are already using cannabis without a doctor's recommendation or guidance. Currently, the VA prevents patients from accessing cannabis recommendations. Even worse, it prevents doctors from uh, sorry, learning about cannabis from their community of veterans. Even if the bill is approved, we are uncertain whether doctors will take the initiatives. So, will the bills be reconciled and forwarded to President Biden, or will our politicians in the VA maintain the don't ask, don't tell approach to cannabis use? What do you think? This is Dr. Jean Talleyrand with High at Nine News.
Man, Dr. T. I mean, I hope this passes. I want our vets to have as much access as they possibly can. They've done so much for this country, and I believe that it's very like unconstitutional to disallow veterans and really all Americans the right and choice to freely be able to choose things that help them and aid them through life.
Is this one of those things like 100% on board with that? I believe I agree with you 100%. Jason, is this one of those things though? Are veterans willing to get on paper as medical cannabis patients? Does that strips away their gun ownership rights? Is that one of those things where they'd rather get it not through the
You know that
medical
that that,
path?
that brings up a very interesting point, and so I would imagine that there would be a handful of veterans that aren't really necessarily too worried about that. Meanwhile, I'm sure that there's a lot of veterans that would definitely be worried about that. But I think that's kind of like a Rick's versus reward question, and it's going to vary based off the situations and circumstances that's going on in each one of these veterans' current lifestyles.
Makes
A
sense.
lot of the veterans I meet have take a certain pride in what they've done for our
Mm-hmm.
country, and
100%.
also feel that they deserve to use something that's helpful to
Mm-hmm.
them. So they are almost standing up and leading our way to the legalization of cannabis. Having been in this biz for 25 years, I really feel the veterans have led the way more than the rest of the community.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't
Most
they
definitely.
don't they stand to lose their veterans benefits if they is positive for cannabis use?
Well, that's only in states where there is no type of framework, to my understanding. As long as they are in a state where there is somewhat tolerated, allowed, regulated, or whatnot. That is not necessarily the position that the VA takes as regards to blackballing individuals because of.
Yeah, I think a lot of docs just look the other way, or tell their patients, VA docs tell their patients, well, get a recommendation somewhere else. I can't do it for you, but I'm okay with you doing it. Don't ask, don't tell,
Hmm.
kind of.
Yes. And just I want to read this comment from Nick Bradley. He is a veteran. He threw this in the chat. He says, "If it were a prescription and the VA was paying for cannabis medicine, as it does with opioids that kill them, they just might." He says, and
Hmm.
it, and I agree. I agree with Nick on that. I 100% agree with Nick on that, without a doubt. Without a
Well,
doubt.
I think we're pretty close. I think because they have been leading the way, I imagine the VA will also lead the way in understanding cannabis
You
and
have a
seeing
lot of
how it
faith in the
works.
VA, Dr. T.
I have a lot of faith in the veterans. They really are pretty brave, and so
Hmm.
bring on the politics.
Yeah, shout out. But I just, if history is any telltale of what happens, like I hope that isn't the case, because this already has gotten this far before and got stripped out at the last minute. And with this administration, who knows exactly what possibly could happen, and everything going on with the House and the Senate. All I hope is that we get some positive progress on this front overall. But time will tell, and we will cover it all here at High at Nine News for you.
Absolutely, that and safer banking, right?
The 100% safer banking. That's right.
S- So, what happens if Mike Johnson has to approve this bill because it says House
I
and
don't.
Senate leaders
Yeah,
or a
I don't.
special committee?
I don't think Mike Johnson is going to be on that prohibitionist mindset to where he's going to be blocking cannabis bills just because they have cannabis involvement in them. I mean, he's from Louisiana. He has a very high veterans population. They do have medical cannabis in Louisiana, so that is something that is happening within his state and within his own constituency. And at the same time, too, the fact that Matt Gaetz was able to succeed in pulling Congresswoman Nancy Mace to oust former Speaker Kevin McCarthy, I'm willing to bet that there's some political horse trading that went off to ensure that her bill gets a standing floor vote on its own merits. And I'm willing to bet that was all part of a grandioso deal in regards to getting her to come over to vote to oust Speaker McCarthy. That would be my guess. That's an educated guess, and that's I'm running with that until proven otherwise.
Well, we'll see if her bill comes up, right?
It will. I mean, her bill was in the news today. It's not a story that we're covering today, but it was in the news talking about it was introduced. But we already covered that already earlier this week or last week, or all these days they just mesh in together sometimes. Dr. T, it's like a big old PB&J sometimes.